After failing to make the agreed-upon payments twice, Zimbabwe has proposed amending the terms of the $3.5 billion settlement it made with white farmers 2 years ago. The revised plan was included in the budget that Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube presented recently. The original agreement stated that four $437.5 million annual installments totaling half of the money were to be paid to farmers who were forced off their land 20 years ago in the first year. With the news that the government wants to renegotiate the terms of the deal, Andrew Pascoe, president of the Commercial Farmers Union Group, says that the group would hold talks with the minister to understand what he means. Joining me from Harare, Zimbabwe is Denford Mutashu, president of the Confederation of Zimbabwean Retailers. Denford, when we look at this conversation, after the initial payments that Zimbabwe made, many of us were happy about it and we thought that this was actually progress. We've seen Zimbabwe struggle to continue with the terms of the deal. So what particularly has been affecting Zimbabwe from going through a deal that it signed and negotiated for itself? What's the issue?
Thank you. I think it is also appropriate to give a context to the land issue, which is very emotive and a sense of conflict in the generality of Africa, and Zimbabwe is not an isolated case. If you look at it back then, since 1889, there was the Lipa concession and as well as the Native Reserves Order in Council, which led to the 1930 Land Apportionment Act. And in 1951, we had the Native Land Husbandry Act, which was also led to, which came to the 1965 Tribal Trust Lands Act. And in all these acts, it was initially a basis of land appropriation without compensation from the black people, from the Zimbabweans. And the use of force, repression, and segregation and violence was applied to take that land from the black people. So I think the benevolence of the new dispensation under His Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa to pay for infrastructural development as the our constitution stipulates is something that is got to be welcomed, and indeed it has been welcomed by the international community and the former white commercial farmers. But I think it was always very clear that despite the commitment to have paid about half of the 3.5 billion within a year of signing the global settlement deed and the global compensation agreement, the issue of resources obviously was going to come into play. Yes. Remember, 437.5 million was going to be paid annually for the succeeding 5 years. So basically, if you look at the land reform program after independence, there was a lot of developments as far as land redistribution is concerned, dating back from the Lancaster Constitution, which was signed between Britain and Zimbabwe, and of course with other associated parties. And in that constitution, there was, Britain was supposed also to pay, towards the compensation or towards the appropriation or the land reclamation by Zimbabwe and Zimbabweans. But obviously, it was something that was going to be done gradually, beginning with 1980, with the Zimbabwe Conference on Reconstruction and Development, ZIMCODE, and in 1981, the Communal Land Act, 1985, the Land Acquisition Act, which was also followed by the Land Reform and Resettlement Act. And of course, in 1992, we had the Land Acquisition Act, which was buttressing the 1981 one. But of course, the donor conference, which was held in 1998, was part of finding solutions to the land question and ensuring that the impasse between Britain and Zimbabwe, which was grounded on the land question, since the majority of Zimbabweans had no land even after fighting a protracted liberation struggle, they had actually then to find a way of trying to accelerate the land reform program. And that has culminated to the current agreement. And obviously, for that which government has paid is something that has got to be accepted and something that has got to be appreciated.
All right, so Denford, I need us to move forward to now because of time. And the new proposal that the minister put forth has a few things. So these are the details we know right now. It sees some $350 million being paid over the 4 years, and this would include installments of $35 million a year for 3 years, and the balance in 2026 possibly raised from selling the 12.5% stake the farmers hold in state-owned miner Kuvimba. Again, government is also intending to raise or rather issue dollar-denominated treasury bonds to pay the remaining $3.15 billion. So when you look at the breakdown of this new proposal, sort of the reworked proposal, do you think it's much more reasonable in terms of the resources that Zimbabwe has and even the pressure to pay? Do you also think it's something that the farmers are likely to agree to? Because this seems to have come as a sort of shock to them, with the head of the farmers group saying that they want to meet with the minister to understand what the minister is saying. So it doesn't seem like this was run by them before it was presented last week. So do you think it's more reasonable and it's something that the farmers could agree to in order to get the compensation that has overall been agreed to?
I think there are quite a number of factors that came to play after the signing of the global agreement, in a compensation agreement. Remember, COVID happened. And a lot of nations, not only Zimbabwe, its economies were ravaged. And even now, the Russia-Ukraine war has happened, and it has also affected extraterritorial jurisdictions like developing economies, especially Zimbabwe and other developing countries in the southern African part of Africa. And of course, if you also look at how affected currencies have been owing to that geopolitical crisis, it also follows that the consequences of such extraterritorial, impact of such actions may also have had an impact adversely on the agreement. Not to say the government is not willing to pay. The government has shown a commitment to pay by just bringing on the table the former white commercial farmers. And of course, pending such an agreement, which was signed off by the Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Tolulope, of course, with his counterpart, the then acting Minister of Agriculture, Honorable Opa Muchinguri, who is currently the Minister of Defense. So that is actually a commitment which His Excellency has put forward. And I think the basis of the payments must also be related to the performance of the economy, and the performances of the economy, just like what has happened globally, has also been affected by other factors, just like in our case. There are a lot of other infrastructural developments that are taking place in our country, and also trying to revive an economy that has been battered over the period of 2 decades. And that also happening, there are also other international obligations, like the payment of arrears to the Paris Club, as well as the World Bank, and other financial institutions. So I think that also should now be taken into account, given the performance of the economy, which of course the growth projections at that particular time, remember Zimbabwe grew by more than 7%, but it has now been revised to around 4%. So actually that also can come into effect.
All right, so Denford, before we go, I'm going to need this answer, unfortunately compressed because of time, but it'll be in 2 places. The renegotiation, the potential renegotiation, is dependent on the farmers' groups and representatives agreeing to what has been proposed. So 1, what happens if they say no to this new proposal and they insist on staying with the deal that was signed 2 years ago? Very briefly. And then secondly, when we look at this, what does resolving this dispute really mean for Zimbabwe? It has lingered. It has caused the economic issues that the country has experienced, the economic sanctions that the country has experienced from the U.S. as well as the EU. What would resolving this mean for Zimbabwe? Very quickly, because of time.
I think it's a process of renegotiation, just like what happened for us to get here. And I would not think that the farmers are not going to be agreeable, because what is important ultimately is for the funds to be made available for the payment of the former commercial white farmers. And of course, if Zimbabwe manages to clear this hurdle, definitely we should now see the welcoming, rather the developments in the international fora where even the issue of sanctions should now be removed because there won't be any sticking issues. Because remember, for Zimbabwe to receive these sanctions or to be slapped with sanctions, it was after the accelerated land reform program, which was initiated to reclaim land that saw 300,000 Zimbabweans being settled. And of course, land that used to be owned by about 4,500 former commercial white farmers.
Okay.
So indeed, it is going to be a way of showing the world that Zimbabwe is indeed ready for re-engagement, just like His Excellency President E.D. Mnangagwa has initiated since he came into power.
All right, we'll leave it at that. There is conversation to be had. We hope that there is going to be some mutually beneficial and acceptable resolution to this, and we'll be following to see how it plays out. Denford, Mutashu, thank you as always for joining me.
Thank you.
And it is one case, one very African case that many people have had their eyes on for the past 2 decades. $3.5 billion is what was negotiated between Zimbabwe, vested interests, of course, and white farmers who were disposed of their land over 2 decades ago. Now Zimbabwe says it must renegotiate the terms of that agreement. Will the farmers agree, and could this dispute resolution be the beginning of seeing Zimbabwe reclaim some of its economic pride? It's a conversation we'll be following very closely. This is how we wrap things up on today's edition of Business Edge. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Head to our website, www.newscentral.africa, and of course, download our mobile app. 12 p.m. West African time. News Central now comes your way with the latest from here on the continent and beyond. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. It's a Monday, which means it's time to hustle and we win. Let's get that spirit going today.